All right. So yesterday I got a little bit more work done and ran into a couple issues or whatever, and figured it'd be a good idea to make a video going over what I ran into, and uh, just we'll go over it. So with this project, I let the owner of the truck, buy and bring his own parts and whatever. And, I didn't expect him to have everything, because unless you do this all the time, you're not going to know what all you need to every piece and component to pull this off. So, and even I forget, unless the vehicle is in front of me, and I just can look at it and start from the front and then just kind of go over everything in my head, you're always going to miss something. So we'll start at the front. So, you got the intercooler is going to be at the front. I typically get, the VS, whatever, 31 by whatever it is typically, a good fit for the front. So when you buy the intercooler, all you get is the intercooler. So then you need a piping kit. So they have a 3-inch, VS has a 3-inch piping kit. There's 3-inch intercooler piping kits everywhere. Excuse me. They come with straight boots, 45s, 90 boots, and then the clamps, and then T-bolt clamps, and then you have straight aluminum pipe, 45, 90, U-bends and whatnot. So that's kind of what you want to get to build your cold side. And that'll get you what you need for that. Now, sometimes, depending on which turbo you get, if you get like a S400 chassis and it's not a race cover, then there's going to be a V-band flange on the discharge of the compressor housing. So, but the 7875 is slip fit. So if you get the one that has the V-band style fitting here, I've seen people grind it down and use it as a slip fit. The actual flange is, well, there's a flange, V-band type flange that goes for it that's kind of pricey. Summit has one that's $30-$40 last time I checked. I don't know about now, but it goes on there on the V-band part and then puts it to a slip fit. So, kind of pointless, but I've used those a few times. But then the other thing you might need on the intercooler piping, the E38s, they like to have a mass airflow sensor, regardless if you're using it or not. Even if you're in speed density, it's just the inherent nature of an E38. For some reason, they like to have and see the mass airflow sensor, and we've seen them give problems if it's not in the system. So we found it's best to just have the mass airflow in there and, just leave it be. So then we'll come to, next will be the turbo. So when you buy a turbo, guess what you get? A turbo and nothing else. So that's just how car parts are. You buy the component, and then there's all these sub parts you need to make it fit and work. So when you buy the turbo, that's all you're getting is the turbo. You're not getting the oil feed, you're not getting the oil drain, you're not getting the discharge V-band clamp and flange. You're not getting anything for the inlet here. You're not getting the air filter or anything. You're just getting a turbo. So, and the discharge he bought for this, I don't know what he got it for, but it is not even close to fitting. These little 7875s with the 125 exhaust housing are a 4-inch discharge, and a 4-inch V-band fits them. So I had him buy a 4-inch V-band because I was going to use it under the truck to make the downpipe removable. But when I saw what he got, I had to use it up here. So I'll hopefully start making the downpipe today. Again, with the oil feed and oil drain I talked about in the last video, don't buy the one from VS because the hose isn't long enough. They give you a weld-in bung for the pan, and then none of the fittings were correct even for their own turbo. So that's why I like to buy my own parts, just because I've done it enough. I know what I need, and that's another thing I want to talk about is on the VS site. A lot of times they don't have much information about the turbo, what exhaust flange you need, what thread pitch, or because some of the turbos up here take a 1/4 inch MPT thread into it. Some of them take a bolt-on flange, and this one takes an 1/8 inch pipe to -4. So I mean, their feed and drain kit on this one was a total bust. I did do the oil drain, you can see right here. So I did it yesterday, got it in and on, and then this is actually what was sent in the VS kit, and that is not long enough to go from a turbo in this configuration to the front of the oil pan where I like to put it. So that's all the hose you get for however much money you pay for the one from Varin. So just be aware of that. If you think your drain's gonna be closer to the pan or something else, go for it. But just be aware that you're gonna get a weld-in bung for the pan, which I never use, and then the fitting for the turbo, which the fitting that goes bolts to the bottom of the turbo for the oil drain doesn't come with bolts, so you've got to have the bolts. That's just how it goes. So and you think, oh, it doesn't come with bolts. Well, I've got a pile of bolts down here because I keep bolts because I know you need bolts, and sometimes having to go to the parts store to try to find bolts is time consuming and what have you. So I always I keep bolts. I don't throw bolts away. So so that's with the turbo. With the map sensor, you get a map sensor. That's all you get is a map sensor. And this map sensor, I assume it's a 3-bar map. I haven't looked it up, but typically the ones I'm used to seeing are red right there. So this connection right here is different from what the truck came with, so you have to have this adapter harness, and if you see, the wires are crossed on the harness because they're different. This is a different pin out than what came on this truck. Now the other thing is the style, how it fits into the intake. So this end has an O-ring fit, and then it uses that bolt right there to secure it to the intake. And then this style has like a little plastic clip that goes over the top and holds it in there, and that hole is too small for that barb of the new map sensor. So what I do is I take a set of calipers and measure this, and then drill that out till it fits, break the tabs off. And then the other problem you run into is the depth of the O-ring, because that plastic in this intake right here is not very thick. Excuse me. So you need to space this so the O-ring seals tightly against the intake. So I use a washer or something like that, and then I use a self-tapper or something to blow through the intake to hold it in. So that's the map sensor. Again, when you get the map, that's all you get, the map. Now some GM vehicles already have the correct end on there, this end, and you don't need the adapter harness. And sometimes the sensor is at the back and yours is at the front, and this little harness wouldn't have been long enough. But you can pull it back in the harness, because this wire is coming through this way to the ECU. So if this needed to be longer, I could open up this loom and pull this wire to get me some more length to put it where it needs to go. But that's good where it is. All right, now let's talk about the injectors. That was the main thing I ran into yesterday. Was he got the Holley rails that I like, that work well on these trucks, but the way he got the injectors, it defeated the whole purpose of these rails, which is to use the factory clip to hold the injector into the rail. So here's his injector right here, and now there's a lot of there's a few different injectors. Okay, you have different lengths, you have different diameter O-rings on the bottom, you've got different plugs. This is an EV6 plug, and if you go on ICT's website, they have a good chart that shows you the different injectors. So when you're ordering injectors, and he got FICs, and I guarantee you, for what he paid for them, he could have got exactly the ones he needed to not necessitate what I had to do to make them fit and work. So the ones he got were shorter than this, number one, and number two, the O-ring on the bottom was, he must have got LS3 injectors. He didn't tell me what he got, but that's got to be what they were, is LS3, because they're shorter, they're a short little injector, and then they have a fat O-ring on the bottom, because I've encountered this before on other projects where the O-ring wasn't thick enough on the bottom going into an LS3 intake to where they didn't seal. And there was actually an air leak around the O-ring into the intake, and it was problematic. K-Tech sells an O-ring specifically for that, and I forget the application. It was like because the diameter under this O-ring is also different on different injectors as well. So, you know, this I couldn't use this O-ring on those because it's a different diameter. But luckily, I had a bag of O-rings in my toolbox, again, because I don't throw anything away. If I get a set of O-rings or extra parts or something, I put it in my toolbox or put it somewhere where I can't find it again. And then when I remember I need it, I spent all day looking for it to find everything I can't remember I had. But, you know, there's a lot to injectors. I know it doesn't seem like it, but on a boosted application, you want a minimum of 80-pound injectors. And you might as well go ahead and buy a bigger injector, because you're going to turn it up, you're going to run more, you're going to do more. So that's why I like the Holley 100-pound injectors. And then if they're the short ones, then you have to buy the adapters that space it to make it taller, because otherwise the attachment point on your intake is going to be too low, and then you can't secure the fuel rail. So I had to add adapters to or spacers, or however you want to call it, to the top of his new injectors to get the height up enough. And then it was a little tall, so I had to use a spacer between the mounting tab and of the intake and the fuel rail to make sure that they're nice and solidly mounted. Oh, and I guess you can see it right there, that spacer. So I had to do that to get that in. So, you know, so he got the length wrong, and he got the O-ring size was wrong, and they will not go in a truck intake because they have a smaller hole. So that's things that you need to look out for when you're getting injectors, because if you're buying from FIC, you should be able to tell them exactly what you've got and what you're putting them in, and they get you what you need. Because the only reason I do that with the Hollies is because the Holly injectors are $300 or something. The 100 pound an hour injectors are like 100 or 300, $400, something like that. Those FIC injectors are not cheap. So if you're going to be paying that kind of money, you need to get what you need, because adapters are not cheap. And then, the O-rings and all the stuff you got to do to make them fit and make them work. And again, since I do this a little, every now and then, I have stuff laying around where I can overcome the situation and move on. Now, that being said, when he got the fuel rails, guess what he got? Fuel rails. Guess what he didn't get? Everything else needed to make it work. So they did come with the fitting on the end, but guess what you don't see? A hose or a fitting to go to this side of the rail. So, I've got to go get fittings to finish plumbing all that up, which, that's not his fault. That's just, this is how this goes, and that's why I wanted to make the video. So, that's, again, just like turbo. When you buy the turbo, that's what you get, the turbo. When you buy the fuel rails, that's what you get, the fuel rails. Now, some of the kits do come with a little bit of a couple fittings and a couple hoses and stuff, but you need to be cognizant of that. You need to know what you're getting, but know what you need so you can know what to get. So, it's no big deal, but I'll have to buy, how many feet of braided hose, look and see what fittings I need to build the crossover, because what I like to do is feed to the back of number 7, come up the rail, have my crossover in the front, go down this rail, and then over to the pressure regulator, and then back to the tank. That's the way I like to plumb my fuel rails. So, and all the stuff he bought, there's no fuel rail or no fuel hose, there's no fuel fittings, none of that. Now, some of the PQI regulators, like the one I used on that regular cab short bed out there, that regulator kit came with fittings and hose and stuff like that, and I was able to plumb it. And that's the reason I got that, is because I knew I didn't have any dash 6 fittings or hose in my box, because I used it on, run into this on something else and needed a fitting, and I've exhausted my laying around stash. So I have to figure out what I need first, and then I'll have to go to Summit and get all those fittings. Now, the other thing, since we're still on the fuel related stuff, let's go back to the injectors. When you get injectors, the reason that people with HP tuners, and I have on my HP tuner shirt, like the more expensive injectors and FIC and all that, is because they have very good data that make these injectors run well with HP tuners. And that is a problem with stock ECU, is you have to have good injector data in order for it to run properly. And the cheap, like the Holly injectors I run, there's no data out there for them, like published data. I have found good enough data to be able to get them to run well enough where Michael was able to tune them and make them run correctly. But, to other people that don't know that or know how to do that, the FIC injectors come with all the data you need to put into HP tuners to make them run correctly. So that's another thing you need to be aware of with your injectors, is if you're using HP, make sure you get injectors that have data to input to HP tuners. If you're running Holly, there's probably a drop-down box with your an injector size or something, and it'll run. But with HP, it's not that way. Let's see. So another thing will be the crossover pipe underneath there. again, what I do is when I get one of these trucks, a stock truck in here, I cut up their stock Y pipe and repurpose it for my crossover to build the crossover. He bought this crossover. I don't know where he bought it from. I think it was from Summit. I don't know. But anyway, it didn't fit. So, for me, that's not a problem. But for you, if you're buying it thinking, I'm going to buy this crossover and it's going to bolt on and fit, you're wrong. I don't go into buying any car part expecting it to fit and work, because it never does. So after I cut his, purchased how many $100 crossover in half and completely redid it, it fits great now. So, and another thing is the turbo log. The turbo log these are the Amazon T4 turbo logs, and they don't come with a V-band at the back for the crossover, so you've got to buy the right V-band. And what I do is buy a V-band assembly from Summit, and you only use one side and the clamp to bolt up to the back of the log there and build your crossover. So, and then with the turbo logs from these Amazon turbo logs, you've got to go in there and you've got to clean up the, how you call it, like the flashing or the casting flaws. That's what it is. You've got to clean up the casting flaws on these things, because otherwise, once you bolt it on, you won't be able to get a socket on your spark plugs to get them in and out. So again, since I've encountered this a few times, before I put them on the truck, I go ahead and cut all the casting off and then bevel the bottom edge of the log so I can get a socket in there and get to my spark plugs. So that's another thing you need to be aware of. On the feed side down there for my oil feed, I go to the that fitting above the oil filter that has the 2 bolts, and then most of the oil pans I have, they have the fitting that already basically is an oil feed, and you just drill it through. It's already the right size, and then you tap it for 1/8" pipe, put your 1/8" pipe to a -4 fitting in there, and then run your hose up. I'm rerouting this because it's so long, but go under the manifold, keep it away from heat, and then come up under your intake, and then you want a 90 on this end to get, cause it just fits better, because if you do a straight, it's going to be a long radius straight and curve in, so you just want to come straight into it. For air filters, I do like to run air filters on my street stuff, just because it's not worth the risk to not run a filter. I've seen people get wiring harnesses sucked in there and destroy their turbo. Anything could fly up from the engine bay and come in here, and then your turbo's done. So, I don't really like the turbo screens, the turbo guards, or whatever they are. And they're number one, they're way overpriced for what they are. And then number two, some of them, the hole size is still big enough, where it could take something substantial in there and wreck it. So I like to get whatever size it is, exhaust pipe or something, and then put a coupler on here, and then have a nice radius, and then put my filter over here. So, or if you got enough room to put a nice big one straight on the front, and that's good too. This one seems to fit pretty good, and there's a good distance, unlike the Faller Speed log where it was about this far from the fan. I don't know why. The other thing's a catch can. So this, he got here's the catch can. So he got a catch can set up. Again, you want good ventilation, because if you have any buildup of crank pressure, you're gonna start having oil leaks. So This fitting right here is screws directly in to your oil cap, and then it gives you a -10 up here. Historically, these used to be like $80 when they first come out. Now you can get them on Amazon for $9 or $10 if they're in stock. And then you want a nice big hose like a -10 because you want plenty of ventilation. So that's how you get on this side. On the back side, I have drilled and tapped for a 1/2-inch pipe to a -10. I don't have a fitting. Again, when I go get the fuel line stuff, I'll get the fitting to go back there, because when you buy the catch can, guess what you get? A catch can. You don't get any of the hoses, any of the fittings, anything else that you need to run a catch can setup. So you need the catch can setup, you need the hose and fitting kit, and then you need the cap fitting here, and you need a 1/2-inch by -10 for the back. Or you could use the weld-on plug from the Verin kit and TIG weld it on. I have a TIG welder. I don't like to use it. I prefer to drill and tap. So that's a lot of the turbo stuff. And then he got a blow-off valve. I typically don't run a blow-off valve, but he bought a blow-off valve, so he's going to get a blow-off valve. The wastegate, I typically run a 44, 45 millimeter in the crossover. I've never had a problem with it. I've seen a lot of people have problems with it. I don't know why they have problems with it. I've done it I don't know how many times, and I've never had a problem with it. So I guess I'm just lucky. So, but when you get the wastegate, guess what you get? A wastegate. No, it does come with a flange at least. It doesn't come with any of the piping or anything, but it does come with the flange. And you want a V-band style flange on a wastegate and blow-off valve. I don't think they make a wastegate anymore that has a flange with bolts in it. Back in the day, that's all they had. Turbonetics or something, Delta Gate, and that's like old stuff. and I may have one. I think my red truck has one. My 2500 has a Delta Gate on it, or whatever it's called. But again, if you use a 60 millimeter, from the back pressure in the system and stuff, you're going to have a problem keeping it closed. That's my experience. Your results may vary, but I've never had a good experience running a 60 millimeter gate. It's always been too big for me, and I haven't been able to control the boost, and had problems keeping it closed. So it could be user error, I don't know, but again, 44, 45 millimeter gates always work well for me. The camshaft. So when you buy a camshaft, all you get is a camshaft. So you need the correct springs to match the camshaft. You need a cam plate, a new cam plate, because there's a seal behind it, and I always run a new cam plate. He did not get a cam plate, but I had one laying around, so he got a new cam plate. You also need depending on what you're trying to do, if you're going from VVT or DOD or something like that, you're going to need a 3-bolt cam gear with a 4X wheel if it's a 58X motor. If it's 24X motor, you're going to need a 1X timing gear. He got a new timing chain. He did not buy a damper that goes between. I like to run the damper, but he didn't have one. So, but LS has ran without like that for years before they did that. But so you need to make sure you got the front cover with a cam sensor on it. He got a new oil pump and pickup tube and all that stuff. Let's see. So I think, and then push rod length. You do want to measure push rod length. It's always a good idea. So roll it around and watch your valve events and make sure you're on the bottom of the cam lobe. And then when you want to spin the push rod and tighten the rocker arm until you feel it touch. That's 0 lash. And then you want a half a turn of preload. Typically, depending on what lifter you have, but typically you want about a half a turn of preload, and that's with it torqued to the 22 foot-pounds. You want your half-inch preload from that. So, like I say, I just want to go over these things. If you got any questions or whatever, just put them in the comments, and I'll try to answer them for you. But like I say, there's a lot to this, and instead of just the big pieces, So you got the big ticket items, right? But then you also got the nickel and dime things that'll tax you to death. So that's why I wanted to make this and go over that.